gentlemen, thank you for being at the Mysuru Literary Lit Fest. Mr. Shanbhag and Mr. Perur, thank you so much for being with us today. I think we're all very excited and very honored by your presence today. To our loyal and faithful Mysore audience, thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining us. We were a little worried that the previous panel may eat into some of our time, and the discussion on Sakina's kiss may become Sakina's peck on the cheek. So we don't really. Credit goes to Jayashree for bringing me that up. And so we don't want that to happen, so we will probably run 10 minutes over. To start with, I would like to invite Mr. Shanbhag to read from his book, and then we can get into the questions.
May I request the organizers to please close the door and send the people out who are still chatting. I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from this novel, Sakina's Kiss, which was published in 2021 and translated into English and published last year by Penguin. This is in the first person. This is about, and Venkatamana is the protagonist. ಓದಿದ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಕಲ್ ಎಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗಿಗೂ ನನ್ನ ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೂ ಸಂಬಂಧವೇ ಇಲ್ಲದಿರುವುದನ್ನು ಇನ್ನೂ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಅರಗಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಲಾಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದ್ದಲ್ಲೇ ಸಂಬಳ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗುತ್ತಿದ್ದರೂ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಚಲನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವಶ್ಯವಾದ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಚಕ್ರವಾಗಬೇಕೆಂಬ ಇರಾದೆಯಿಂದ ಕೆಲಸಗಳನ್ನು ಬದಲಾಯಿಸಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ದೂರದ ನುಣ್ಣೆಯ ಗುಡ್ಡವನ್ನು ಹತ್ತಿರದಿಂದ ನೋಡಿದೊಡನೆ ನನ್ನಂಥ ನೂರಾರು ಚಕ್ರಗಳಿರುವುದು ಗಮನಕ್ಕೆ ಬರುತ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಸಣ್ಣ ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಏಣಿಯ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮೆಟ್ಟಲಿಗೆ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಕಂಪನಿಯ ಒಂದು ಮೆಟ್ಟಲು ಸಮ ಎನ್ನುವುದು ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಗ್ರಹಿಸಲಾಗದೆ ಒದ್ದಾಡಿದ್ದೂ ಇದೆ. ಅತಿ ಹತಾಶೆಗೆ ಅವಕಾಶವಿರದಂತೆ ಆಗಾಗ ಬಡ್ತಿ ಸಿಕ್ಕರೂ ಹತ್ತತೊಡಗಿದ ಏಣಿ ಯಾವತ್ತೂ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ತುದಿ ತನಕ ಹೋಗುವ ಲಕ್ಷಣ ತೋರಿಸುತ್ತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗಂತೂ ನಿವೃತ್ತಿಯ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನ ತನಕದ ದಾರಿಯೂ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಕಾಣುತ್ತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ನೌ ಈಸ್ ಟಾಕಿಂಗ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಹಿಸ್ ವೈಫ್. ವಿವರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸವೆನ್ನುವುದು ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ಕೆಲಸದ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಜಯ ಕಥೆಯು ಒಟ್ಟಾರೆ ತೀರಾ ಭಿನ್ನವಾಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಗಣಿತದಲ್ಲಿ MSc ಮುಗಿದೊಡನೆ ಭೇದ ಭಾವವಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಗೆಯ ಪದವೀಧರರನ್ನು ಆಪೋಷಣ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳುವ IT ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿತು. ಬದಲಾವಣೆಯ ಅಲೆಯ ಮೇಲ್ತುದಿಯಲ್ಲಿರಬೇಕೆಂಬ ಮುಂಜಾಗ್ರತೆಯಿಂದ ತನ್ನ ತಾಂತ್ರಿಕ ಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಅಪ್ಡೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳುವ ಕೋರ್ಸುಗಳನ್ನು ಆಗಾಗ ಮಾಡುತ್ತಿರುತ್ತಾಳೆ. IT ಎಂಬ ವಿಶಾಲವಾದ ಸಮುದ್ರದೊಳಗೆ ನೆಲೆಸಿರುವ ನೂರಾರು ಮೀನು, ಹಾವು, ಜಂತು, ಕ್ರಿಮಿಯಾದಿ ತರತರದ ಉಪಜೀವಿಗಳ ನಿಖರವಾದ ವಿಂಗಡಣೆ ಅಸಾಧ್ಯವಾದುದರಿಂದ ಅವಳ ಕೆಲಸವೇನೆಂಬುದನ್ನು ಸರಳವಾದ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ವಿವರಿಸುವುದು ನನಗೆ ಸುಲಭವಲ್ಲ. ಅವಳ ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೂ ಓದಿದ ಗಣಿತಕ್ಕೂ ಇಲ್ಲದಿರುವ ಸಂಬಂಧವನ್ನು ನಾನು ಕೆದಕಿ ಕೇಳುವುದೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸಾರಾಂಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳುವುದಾದರೆ, ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮಂಥ ಲಕ್ಷಾಂತರ ಮಂದಿಯ ಜೀವನ ವಿಧಾನದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಗೆಯ ಸರಾಸರಿಯನ್ನು ಇನಿತೂ ಕಲಕದೆ ಸರಾಗವಾಗಿ ಅವರೊಳಗೆ ಬೆರೆತು ಹೋಗುತ್ತಿರುವ ಜನ. ಒಂದೇ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸವೆಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮದು 2 ಆದಾಯದ ಜೋಡೆತ್ತಿನ ಗಾಡಿ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಕೆಲವು ವಿಷಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸರಾಸರಿಗಿಂತ 1-2 ಹೆಜ್ಜೆ ಮುಂದೆ ಇಡಬಲ್ಲೆವು. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ, ಮನೆಗಾಗಿ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಾಲ ಮಾಡುವ ಧೈರ್ಯ, ಸಣ್ಣದಾದರೂ 2 ಕಾರುಗಳು, ಫೋನು ಬದಲಾಯಿಸುವುದರಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಸರಾಗತೆ, ದುಬಾರಿ ರೆಸ್ಟೋರೆಂಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿಲ್ಲಿನ ವಿವರ ನೋಡದೆ ಕಾರ್ಡು ಎತ್ತಿಕೊಡುವ ದಿಮಾಕು ಮುಂತಾದವನ್ನು ನೋಡಬಹುದು. ಎದ್ದು ತೋರುವ ಮುಖಚಹರೆಗಳಿಲ್ಲದ, ಕುರೂಪಿಯೂ ಅಲ್ಲದ, ಮಾತನಾಡಿಸಬೇಕೆಂಬ ತೀವ್ರ ಆಸೆ ಹುಟ್ಟಿಸಿದ, ಆದರೆ ಮಾತನಾಡಿಸಲು ಅಳುಕಾಗದ ಲಕ್ಷಣಗಳಿರುವ ಜೋಡಿ ನಮ್ಮದು ಎಂದರೆ ತಪ್ಪೇನಿಲ್ಲ. ಇಬ್ಬರದು ಸಾಧಾರಣ ಗೋಧಿ ಬಣ್ಣ. ನಮ್ಮ ಚಹರೆಯ ವೈಶಿಷ್ಟ್ಯವನ್ನು ಪಟ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡುವ ಹಠ ತೊಟ್ಟರೆ ನನ್ನ ವಿಶಾಲ ಹಣೆಯನ್ನು, ಈಗಲೂ ಸೊಂಪಾಗಿರುವ ವಿಜಯ ಉದ್ದ ಕೂದಲನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸಬಹುದು. ಬಿರುದು ಬಾವಲಿಗಳಿಲ್ಲದ ಮನುಷ್ಯರಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಥ ಸೂಕ್ಷ್ಮಗಳನ್ನು ಜನ ಗುರುತಿಸುವುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನುವುದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ನಿವಾಸಿಗಳ ಉದಾಸೀನದ ಸಂಬೋಧನೆಯೇ ಸಾಕ್ಷಿ. ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮಿಬ್ಬರನ್ನು ಸೇರಿಸಿ C3 ಮನೆಯವರು ಎಂದು ಕರೆಯುತ್ತಾರೆ. ಇದೇ ಜನ ಮೊದಲ ಮಹಡಿಯ ಶ್ರೀಮಂತ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರಿ ಗುಪ್ತಾನನ್ನು ಅವರೇ ಆ ಗುಪ್ತಾ ಮೊದಲ ಮಹಡಿಯ ಎತ್ತರದ ಮನುಷ್ಯ ಅನ್ನುತ್ತಾರೆ. ಎರಡನೇ ಮಹಡಿಯ ರಿಟೈರ್ಡ್ ಕರ್ನಲ್ನನ್ನು ಹಳೆಗಾಲದ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ತಾರೆ ಸುರದ್ರೂಪಿ ಶಶಿ ಕಪೂರ್ನಿಗೆ ಹೋಲಿಸುತ್ತಾರೆ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
This Kannada Kilake, it is really so good. This is a book that is translated from Kannada to English. Jayashree, since you are multilingual and you've read the book in both languages, do you want to start with it?
Hello. Thank you, Sita. Namaskara elrigu. This is a brilliant fiction which became better because of translation, because it reached more people. So my first question to both of you, each of you will be about translation. First question to you, Mr. Shanbhag. If the author knows both the languages, is he or she allowed to translate one's own book? And the other question is, who picks the translator? And we also want to know, how did you people meet? And what do you look for when you look for a translator?
I think it is, for a writer, it is not about knowing two languages. I think we must look at what is the process which is involved in creative writing, and what is the relationship that a writer has with a language. When we talk about style, we talk about style many times, right? Many times we say this is a style of a particular writer. And in that style, language is a very important component. And most importantly, the imagination of a writer in that language is what largely defines the style of a writer. To give you an example from Kannada, Kambar, for example, who is, most of you must have read or heard him. There is a line in his poem. There are 100 lines, but I'm just quoting a line, which he describes his town Shivapura, and he says, "Hudigera husisittinanga oniya tiruva." See, just imagine, Hudigera husisittinanga oniya tiruva, terada kannugalanna manibagila. Similarly, Bendre, you can again quote hundreds of lines. He is describing a woman going to fetch water. And he says, Kami bekkinanga bavi hadi kalaga sulititta. Like one bavi, bekkinanga kadi. So this is that imagination, that is the style of a writer. And for a creative writer, it is very important to, number one, to understand what her or his style is. And there is a deep connection with the language. And when one writes, it must flow. That flow is very important. You write a word, the next word must appear. You write a sentence, the next word, it must appear like magic. And that is where the magic of writing is. That is where something that is unknown to a writer is brought up on your page, on your screen. So to touch that unknown, there's a deep relationship required with the language. My relationship with language is that kind of a relationship I have only with Kannada. Just because I can speak well in English doesn't mean I have that relationship. Doesn't mean that I have, for a translator, it is the same. And Srinath has that relationship with English. So that imagination, that imaginative use of a language, I'm no match to him. So they are two different things. So when we say, coming back to your question, yes, of course I know 5 languages. It doesn't mean I can translate into 5 languages, right? So, which is why Srinath does this translation. And yes, we knew each other for a long time before he translated Ghachar Gochar. And when Ghachar Gochar was published, we met. In fact, we met in Koshis, I remember, and I asked him if he will be interested in translating this. He took 3 days. He had not read the book. He read the book, and then that was his first translation. The rest you can hear from him.
A question to you about translation as well, Mr. Perur. And let me congratulate you for a brilliant translation of both the books.
Thank you.
Is the translated book considered as a book by itself? Like, does it merit to be called as a book by itself? Also, how closely you work with the original author when you translate? And the third point is very interesting for me because you have sort of brought out some of the Kannada expressions and adages and proverbs into the English translation, and it's always a dilemma for a translator. So, somewhat like bisi tuppa nungakku agala ugalakku agala, should we say, you have written like hot ghee in the mouth, and avana antyakriye naane madbirtini when somebody gets angry, or something like badavar makkalna bavik talli aala nododu, and all these expressions you have brought out into your translation. The dilemma is always, do we the translators go to the reader and make it easier for them, or bring the reader closer to the cultural essence of our language? Sometimes bhashantara andre samskrutika hastantara, they say. So what's your comment on that?
Thanks, Jayashree. About your first question about if it is an independent book or the same book, I think it is both. There's this interesting provocation, it's a one line by Borges, where he says the original is not faithful to the translation. And I think what was being got at there is that books necessarily transform the process of translation. Because there's a lot of, say in this very book, there's a lot there which Vivek is not saying explicitly. It is implied. It is, based on our knowledge of life, of having lived and so on. There are things we join the dots in very specific ways. And if it goes through a translator's consciousness, there is bound to be a trace of it. So a translated book is a product of, conjoined consciousnesses. So yes, it always transforms to some extent. And in Vivek's case, I think it happens doubly so, because he's one of those authors who is willing and interested in participating in the translation and publishing process. So to give you an idea, the second draft of my translation was sent to him and our agent, Shruti, 6 months after I got the Kannada. And it was published 2 years after that point. So in the intervening period, Shruti and I had comments about the Kannada, he had comments about the translation, and we went back and forth many times. So in fact, he likes to say that the English translations of his books are based on the second edition of the Kannada. And the second edition, to some extent, I think is, it takes shape during the translation process as well. So that's how it works with us. And you asked about how closely we work together, and yeah, it's a very, very, very close relationship that way in terms of translation. And about idiom and those things, I treat it as a bit of a buffet. If there is, bisi tuppa nungakku agalla ugalakku agalla, if it is something that has interesting cultural resonances, I might choose to keep it and not say something like stuck between a rock and a hard place or something, which may not even make sense in the cultural context. So it is on a case-by-case basis, really. I don't have one specific rule for all of it. And it is also an aesthetic consideration. You don't have the full spectrum of English to use when you, so I cannot say, Ramu the farmer had an ace up his sleeve. It is a perfectly fine idiom in English, perhaps, in some ways, but then Ramu the farmer may not even be wearing a shirt in many cases. And you cannot use all of English freely, but you will make an aesthetic choice about what works, what doesn't work, and it's a subjective thing.
And I must add to this that we have not had discussions on what is the meaning of a sentence or a word, or that he is quite competent in understanding. But we have always discussed many other things, which is especially what is beneath the text, which only a writer knows. And I would not share it with anyone else. And we meet quite often, frequently, we go for walks. But all the discussions are, it's not that it's always about the text, but it's very important to understand a writer's inner world. What is his or her worldview? What are his priorities, her priorities? What does literature mean? What does language mean? So many we meet and talk about the books that we read, that he has read, I read, we exchange. But all these things I feel helps in the translation. I mean, it may not be, I can't put my finger and say, okay, this is what has resulted into this. But I feel that understanding each other's world is very important in translation. And see, I can't make it as a definition for translation, because many times we don't have a writer available to us. But when a writer is available, I think it's a joy to work with a translator.
Thank you. And now we will come to the book. I know many of us have read it. And on the surface, the story seems to be a very simple one. There's a father, Venkatramana, his wife, Viji, and a rebellious daughter, Rekha. But when you dive deep beneath all those layers, it's a very powerful political statement about the times we live in. Was that a deliberate choice, or did you just follow your muse?
See, when I write, it is not a top-down approach. In the sense, I don't write to make a statement. I don't try to say something political or social or anything. But it is inevitable for a writer when you see so many things which are so powerful and disparate, but still, it has happened to you, or you are a part of it in some way or the other. And like me, there are all of us. There is something that is happening. There is an experience, and there is a perception. Actually, art plays in that space between this. What is our experience and what is our perception? And for me, that is the space, and that is where the story is born. So it is not that I write to convey a message or say something, but obviously when you write a story, it is impossible to escape from what is happening around you. And hence this, it has to be political. And if you ask me, every writing is political. I think we mistake it when we say political. It is not the party politics or the common understanding of what happens in politics. But then the politics is much more deeper. The politics is in our lives. We can't escape politics. But it's not party politics. So there are different politics. And a writer, at least for me, I can say that every writing for me is political in many other ways. Like, for example, there is a lot of aspects of masculinity which is dealt in this work. And I feel it has a lot to do with the political environment in our country today. So you have to really try to understand where those connections are. And many times it's only that you feel it. It is not that you can't say it. And which is where a writer comes in, which is where a story is. And as always, the story, the good literature is always paroksha. It is indirect cognition. You say something, you mean something else. And that is what really haunts us. Yeah, if you say what it means, then it becomes a manifesto. You say something, you mean something else. So I feel that's what has happened. Hopefully it has happened.
I think that makes me jump ahead to a question about the title. So you say something and you mean something else. So the story begins with a knock at the door. And when the door opens, you expect Sakina to walk in. But it's not Sakina, not her kiss, but mystery, politics, caste, Naxalites, masculinity, everything. And in the next 4 days, the reader is taken through in different directions. You don't know in which direction to look. So do you like to make your readers use their imagination, work at your story, and give them the freedom to think whatever you want instead of just tying it all in a neat little bow and handing it all to them at the end?
See, I guess you are talking about the open ending of the book. Open ending, it's not that all my books have open endings, but open ending is a literary technique. And it is open ending doesn't mean a book stops abruptly. You need to really stitch it up and do it well, it takes more effort than closing a story properly. Not properly, meaning in a conventional manner. But there are a lot of advantages in open ending for a story like this, because it all depends on what is the experience that you want to give to your reader. And open ending has a very interesting aspect, which is it has an afterlife for the book. Yeah, unlike in a conventional ending. For example, you have, let's say, there are 3 options. And as a reader, you feel that one is the most appropriate option, and that is what has happened to this story. In that process, it is a very unnerving process because you have decided something. It reveals something about the reader. It reveals something about you because you have chosen one of the 3 options. And which is the experience that I wanted to convey in this book. Because it is something that is, it is not an ordinary story. It looks like an ordinary story, but then it has many layers, and that participation of the reader is what I expected to happen in the novel. And which is why it is, it's slightly open-ended. It's not that it's, but that open ending brings out a kind of participation, brings out a kind of responsibility on the reader. And also for me, if I was a reader, when I read open-ending books, it's that option, to choose option in my mind is very unnerving. And it stays with me, the book stays with me. Because the option that you have chosen today, if you read the book 10 years later, that will be different. Yeah.
So, since there are several paths down which the reader can go and keep guessing, I'm going to put out a couple of guesses. So there's an English teacher, Surendran, who introduces the daughter Rekha to lofty revolutionary talk. Or there's Suresh, a reporter in the village who instigates students and fills their heads with ideas. Way back there used to be an assistant professor in English in Central College, Bangalore. His name was Lankesh, and he happens to be Gauri Lankesh's father. Did you think of him when you were fashioning these 2 characters?
Not really, because I knew Lankesh, but not in this avatar. I was not his student also. But I want to respond to this question slightly differently, because why do we want to see whether this character is real? What is that anxiety that we have that we cannot associate ourselves with an experience in a book? And why are we so anxious to see it in the real world? Yeah? I find it, I don't know, because it again depends on certain aesthetic choices. I grew up with Yakshagana. Yakshagana is a very powerful form in coastal Karnataka. And if you see Yakshagana, there is a stage, 10 by 10 stage, and then there are people with costumes. There are, they are all dressed like Arjuna, Indra, and all this. And there are 4 or 5 people sitting behind them with mradangam and chande and all that, with the drums. And in normal dress, they may be sipping tea. But then we don't question whether that is real. Because for me, what is happening in the 10 by 10 stage with that costumes, that is real. That is the court of Indra. When he describes his court, that is real for me. That is Kurukshetra, that is real for me. So I think I grew up in that kind of a aesthetic environment. And the point I'm making is that when you look at art, there is whether it is in the real world or not, it really does not matter. And when you read a book, what is in the book is real. Yeah? What is in the book is real. Because after writing a book, if I've written it with such intensity, at the end of it, I cannot say it is not my experience. I have seen these characters in such closeness, with such intensity, with such passion. How can I say I am not part of that experience? How can I say I'm not part of this? A story comes to my mind, which is a very interesting one, which is called, there is a book called More Than Real. And it is about, and there is a story mentioned in that book. And the story is this. It's a story from Tamil Nadu. There is a king who is a Shiva Bhakta, who is building a temple for Shiva. And he builds, and there is so much of fanfare, and he decides to do it, to inaugurate the temple on a certain day. And then he, in his dream, he invites Shiva to be there on that day. And Shiva tells him that I can't come, sorry, because I have other engagement. Because in your own kingdom, there is another temple which is being built, and then I want to be there on that day. And the king is baffled because he had no idea that there is another temple being built in his kingdom. And then and Shiva tells him where, what, who. And then king goes in search of him. And he goes to that village, and there is no temple, there is nobody. Then he finds a person, the person by that name, and he goes and says, have you built a temple for Shiva? He says, yes. And then he realizes that he is a real Shiva Bhakta, real meaning he is a Shiva Bhakta, and he wanted to build a temple. And he could not get that money. He tries a lot, but he couldn't get the money. So he then builds a temple in his mind. He starts building a temple brick by brick every day for a year. And the temple is built, and then he has invited Shiva to be there. And Shiva has agreed to be there on that particular day. So that is the very interesting story, and I felt it's a good metaphor to understand a relationship between what is real in a book and what is real in quotes in reality.
I wonder what's happening in my mind because so let me come to this, that there are in your book mentioned, and you also said that, readers, what goes on in their mind, how they perceive things. So there is a lot of mention about television channels and, how they spew stuff in there. And I was wondering if you meant any particular television channel or something that says, the people want to know, so we want to know.
No, as I said, it is what is really important is what is behind this. When I say or given an example, if it has reminded you of something, what I intended is to ask the reader or push the reader to think what is beneath that, what is behind this. And what is that channel doing? Because there is a context to it in the novel. And how the powers within a family work in a certain circumstance. So that is really the point that I was trying to bring. And also when we talk about politics, there are, we say, I'm not interested in politics because we think voting is the only politics and going and voting. But that's not what it is. And there are so many ways in which the outside world comes into our homes. And the context in which this TV thing was there is really to indicate one of the ways in which the outer world enters our homes.
All right, thank you. So then you mentioned voting, and so this is a question about the most profound statement in the book. The mother and daughter, Vijay and Rekha, they are very easy to relate to. But I feel very sorry for Venkatramana because he seems kind of clueless and he's trying very hard to stay relevant. But the most profound thing he says in the book is, when they go to vote as a family, he says, votes are kept secret so that families stay together. That is a very relevant statement to make in the current political climate. So I was kind of making Venkatramana synonymous with the current climate. Any comments on that?
So it was more about the divisiveness that is happening in everywhere in politics, not just in our country, everywhere else in the world. Because the politics likes to have black and white. Because the result has to be concrete. The result has to be a vote. While literature always works against it. Yeah, literature works in a space which is ambiguous. It thrives in ambiguous space. So it is actually, as a writer, it is my responsibility to really understand this. Because when we say, I really don't want to say anything black and white. And the current politics is pushing it, so I am pushing it back. And that's where this story is.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Mr. Perur. This is a book that's translated, and to do as brilliant a translation as you have, you literally have to own the book. You live and breathe the book, so to speak. So I know that it's an author's privilege to end the book wherever they want to end it. But as a translator, when you came to the end of the book, were you turning it around and thinking, have I missed some pages or not?
No, actually. I sort of understand Vivek's sensibility, and I think I saw what he was trying to do. And also all this talk about an open ending. The truth is that all books are open in some ways and closed in other ways. And when we talk about open endings, we just mean very literally at the level of plot, I think. Because often that is used to draw readers in. And I think we live in an age where there is so much access to entertainment and there is so much vying for our attention that things are made easy for us. And to work with a book, with the author is, I don't know, becoming more rare perhaps. So I don't know if Vivek had all of this in mind, but I do think one of the reasons the book has been read by so many people and so on is that he does make it very compelling. And I think he's trying to do something much deeper than just the plot. And he talked about giving a choice to the readers. And I really think after reading a book, a person who's just read the book is forced to decide whether they want to go to place A, B, or C. And in doing so, they end up seeing the landscape on the way to all those places. And so you get a much richer experience of the book, I think. And I was very satisfied with the ending when I read the book. So no, I didn't wonder what was going on at all. Sorry, was there a second part to what? No?
No, that was it. So then, because those of us who want to know every story thread, I have to ask, is there going to be a sequel to this book?
No, not really.
Oh, there are a lot of hints, but I won't go through because, I want to keep to the time. The next question is about engineers. You're both engineers by education and qualification. And there are a lot of statements about engineering degrees and the jobs they get, which Mr. Shanbhag also read in his from his book. One sentence particularly stands out. Shamelessly grabbing opportunities extended by an unjust system is the worst form of corruption. Would either of you care to comment on that? Any engineer can comment on that.
So those are the words of a character, by the way, in the book. So those are not Vivek's words directly. And this is about a very radical character in the book as well. So I don't know. I think engineering has become a sort of entry-level degree to various other professions these days, right? If you're reasonably bright and confused, then you just end up becoming an engineer, and then you figure out later what to do. And Vivek has had a full career. It's one of the things I admire about him, that he used to work full-time and wake up at 4 a.m. before going to work in order to read and write. So all his literary career has been alongside a full-time professional career. So I cannot say the same about myself, but he's done both, so maybe he should say something.
As I said, as Srinath said, it is the words of a character. I want to say something about, when a character speaks in a novel or in a story, a writer has no right to put those words in the mouth of a character unless there is a justification for it in the lives of those characters. Yeah, it's very important thing because we tend to say what we want to say through the character. It is wrong. I mean, wrong in the sense it's not art, because a character, there must be justification for that in the life of those characters. And the point I'm making is there is a justification for this sentence in the life of this character that utters these sentences.
I did have a lot more questions, but I can see someone holding up a 10-minute. And I did say we will go over by 10 minutes because we got the podium 10 minutes late. Sorry? Yes, she is going to talk. We do have that. In fact, I'm going to jump directly to that part of it, which is, I'll let you take over your subject.
Hello. Yeah. Topic is artificial intelligence and writing using artificial intelligence. And I will ask a question to you and question to you also. Mr. Shanbhag, is for you. This is the age of artificial intelligence, and I hear there are chat GPTs and other, which I don't know about, who write for you, whatever you want. And what are your thoughts on that? And second thing is, have you played around with it to find out how it writes compared to your own writing, and your comments about that? And I'll ask him also. Mr. Perur, you have a doctorate in computer science. And have you played around with artificial intelligence or fed a manuscript as Sita wrote? These are her questions. I'm just standing in for her. So have you played around, like feeding a manuscript and trying how it translates? And what are your comments about that?
Yeah. See, artificial intelligence is something which is really very big. It is disruptive. It's going to change our lives in the next 10 years. It's a very different technology. ChatGPT is only tip of the iceberg. And I think we should not base our opinions or understanding of artificial intelligence only on ChatGPT. It is like saying email is entire internet world. It is not. Anyway, before the point I'm making is that the technology is so big and so huge, this is not the space to discuss it. However, I'll just make a point about, since you asked about writing, whether AI can, there are some challenges. Two, I feel, as a writer, I see as a fiction writer, there are two things which is a big challenge for AI. Number one is the surprise element that you have in your fiction. There is something that even a writer is surprised, when you write. And that surprise element is difficult, at least as of now, in AI. AI is trying to surprise itself. But the surprise here is, like for example, if you say the sky is blue, a writer may say the sky is dry, or he may say that sky is heavy. So AI will have all the three options, but when to use and how to surprise with that option is yet to be worked out. But they are trying to do this surprise thing. They are going, not saying blue all the time, but saying something else. Second, for fiction is, I talked about paroksha some time back. You say something, you mean something else. And that is important in literature. It is because there is a context you create. It is not that always you say something, you say something else. Even for example, even we talked about translation. The same sentence in Kannada, if you translate, it may mean something else in English. It may evoke something else in the English. Right? The same sentence. So that paroksha that you in the meaning of a sentence in a context is yet to be tackled by AI. So these are two things that come to my mind as challenges to AI. And I don't know, it may resolve at some point in time. Because I think we should not dismiss it as something which is not so important. Or we should not dismiss it saying human mind is so much far superior. But there are so many things. I can tell you about 90% of the books that are getting published today can be written by AI. But literary books, which I talked about, paroksha, and literary books, it is difficult to do because it has to create a context. Like for example, I keep giving this example, but in King Lear, in the end, He says never, 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 5 times. That meaning of that never is completely different if you have seen or watched or read King Lear. And for AI, it is just the same word repeated 5 times. But creating that context to arrive at that thing. And for example, Girish Karnad's play, Agnimattu Male. The last sentence is Nittile, Male, Nittile. Just 2 words. The whole play is focused and brought to that point where you say Male, Nittile. That is what the whole thing is, because it is Uttunga. It is that point that he takes. These are the things that are yet I feel are challenging, and they are dealing with. But I really don't know what's going to happen.
There was this insightful line I heard from the big picture historian Yuval Noah Harari, where he said, today computers can beat all human beings at chess. They'll take down the world champion quite easily. So a computer can beat a human being at chess, but it cannot feel happy that it has won a game of chess. So that is a critical difference, I think, between the two. And so it comes down to why we do art, why we produce and consume art. And in many realms, computers and machine intelligence is quite convincing. For example, music is probably where it's most compelling now. You can have artificially generated songs and pieces of music that are really convincing. But I consume art in order to feel connected to another human being. And that is what I will want to do. Even if 90% of those books that are written by they're automatically generated in some way. But I will know that my intention in reading is to be in touch with another human being. And so I will try and read those books that are not... And of course, everything that Vivek said is true. And we don't know where it will go. Even people who work on these areas are surprised by the things that algorithms can throw up sometimes. And all that is true of these other forms of art is true of translation as well. There is an art component to translating. And without the experience of having lived life, of knowing what a joke is, by having to involuntarily laugh or, being, so moved by a situation that it makes you cry, I don't think that the best translations come out of an entity like that. Now and for some time at least. And even if they do, I think I would want to prefer to engage with humans because I am one.
Thank you. We have so many questions, probably need another hour, but I will open it up to the audience for questions. My only request is, please have a question. No comment, no opinion. Give your question as short as possible so that we give the authors. Please take it. No, you have to speak.
My question is to Srinath. In Indian Institute of Languages, Mysuru, there is a translation mission where I have worked for a translation of M.N. Srinivas's book, A Forgotten Village. Anyhow, we paid 1,000 rupees per page, that's different. And there, when we translated, it was only Bhavartha. I also translated some work in Hampi University, where it was Shabdhartha. I found it very, very difficult to translate the Shabdhartha. And it's very easy to have Bhavartha. How did you reconcile both?
Again, I think of translation as an act of writing. So I am trying to read the original, internalize it, and then write it in English. So it is, so the reconciliation happens within me. So I'm using my faculties as a writer when I'm translating as well. And that is where it happens, I think.
And I think, when Jayashree asked that question, whether it is your book, my previous book is in 20 different languages. I feel in every language, it's a different book. The story is same, the sentences are same, but it is a different book because the same sentence will evoke different memories in different languages. So it is, and that's what when Srinath said, I will internalize and write, the same sentences may be there, but the way it is written, the way it is structured, the way it is composed is his. Right? It's the same sentence, but that's why I talked about the imagination of a writer.
Yeah. So hi, thank you for the discussion. Yeah. So the same question was to Srinath, like where is the line? Where is the fine line? Because when I read through the book that you had written about travelogues, when it is Monday, it is Madurai. And this was a different shift in the genre of writing for you as well. So what's the process of adapting to a different genre of writing with regards to style? And also what's the process of connection? You also said you read to connect and then tell the story. So just like he said, how much is it you in your perspectives and how much is it staying true to the just aspect of translation, which is carrying forward the author's thoughts and perspectives. So what is the fine line and how do you draw about it and what's the process?
I didn't see it as much of a shift because it was again an expression of who I was. I was at a phase where I was feeling bad about having lost touch with my mother tongue Kannada, and I wanted to do some work which would give me an engagement with the language. And it so happened that it was the same time that Vivek asked if I would translate Gachar Gochar, and I ended up doing it. But this is, I think, there's this book by Kate Briggs called This Little Art, in which she goes into this question at book length. And I think her answer is something that I would agree with, where it says that to a large extent, the imagination is Vivek's, the characters are his, the things to do, the things he wants to say are his. But there is also a craft aspect of writing, which has to be done afresh in English. There is also a sense of understanding and so on. So there is a, there is a art aspect to that as well. And it is definitely to my mind at least, it is a littler art than the original novelist's art. But it is definitely there. And so I don't know your question.
Maybe you may want to talk about your experience of translating Girish Karnad's, because the kind of preparation that is required was different than this.
Yeah, so that was a non-fiction book. I translated Girish Karnad's autobiography, Adartha Ayushya. And so there, also there was no Girish at that time to clarify my questions and so on. And also he used to know, he used to talk in English and he's written a lot in English. So translating his book into English, it had to be in his English. So I ended up having to, if there is a Kannada word, it can be mapped to several English words. So I would have to try and use the word that he might have used. So maybe I became a language model program in that case. So I actually studied talks that he had given and interviews he had done and so on. And I had a file called GK Vocab where I was trying to speak, as he did in some sense. So it was a very different experience. And also because it was non-fiction, if there was a description of a room and that room exists in the world, what happens is that in a novel, it is enough if it is consistent within the universe of the book. But if it is actually out there in the world, then someone can look at it and say that it doesn't match what's in the book. So I had to do a lot of supplementary research, watch films and plays. To translate. So it was a very different experience doing fiction and non-fiction.
I have a quick question for Mr. Shanbhag. The title of your previous book, Gachar Gochar, has become a very popular term for what it denotes. So would you say that this book is a bit of a Gachar Gochar because Ramana's handwriting actually leads to the title Sakina's Kiss, and we are looking all over for Sakina's Kiss, and besides all the other chaos, would you say that?
See, Gachar Gochar is a nonsense phrase, and it has no meaning. It doesn't exist in any language. But the intention of the title is to suggest that the experience that is captured in the novel cannot be understood by what you already know. You need to do something more to understand it. So that was the suggestion in putting the title, and also it has a meaning within the book. Similarly, Sakina's case is this particular incident that you mentioned, that episode. It's a central metaphor. It's about a person's handwriting and people trying to decipher his handwriting over a period of time. So he writes letters and then they can't read. They don't know what it is, and it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes months for them to understand what he has written, and so the point I was trying to make or suggest is that kind of experience that is captured in the book also requires you to stay with it for long, allow it to sink in, and let it reveal over a period of time. And that was the. But of course, this episode has a meaning and something relevant in the book as well.
Thank you for a very interesting panel. While Mr. Vivek Shanbhag says every language is beautiful in its own right, Mr. Srinath Perur has clearly shown that the writer's inner world can be beautifully retained and expressed in his translated version. Both of you have joined hands to give us all a seemingly simple but a super successful book. Sita and Jayashree, thank you for pressing the right buttons to get all of us curious enough to start reading the book immediately. Dear audience, we are sorry to say that we have no AI right now to get the book directly to your brains. So the books are available outside. Please get them personally autographed. Thank you.